In Beaufort, South Carolina, a perfect HOA community rose on what developers called forgotten land. Progress was relentless until the day a bulldozer struck something buried deep, a secret. From a nearby cottage, a black woman watched in silence. She was the only one who knew the truth. They thought they were building a town, but in reality, they were walking straight into the trap she had been setting for 40 years. How did she turn their dream into her perfect revenge? Subscribe to Deepu Cater Stories to witness the moment the trap snaps shut. The unearthing. They say a perfect trap is not the kind you see when it is too late. It is the kind you walk into willingly, believing it is the path to glory. For Julian Croft and the nascent Homeowners Association (HOA) of the Oyster Point Preserve, that glory smelled of newly turned earth and the salt tang of the Carolina wind. They did not know that every inch of land they leveled was not a beginning. It was the final step into a history that refused to be buried. The air on that June morning in Beaufort, South Carolina was thick, heavy. You could drink it if you tried. At Oyster Point Preserve, the sound of progress was the only thing that cut through the humidity. The growl of heavy machinery, the distant whine of a saw. 96 luxury homes stood in pristine rows, their pastel siding gleaming under a sun that was already relentless. Manicured lawns, still fragile, drank greedily from automated sprinklers. This was a place of order, of rules, a place where the grass grew to a precise height, and the mailboxes were all uniform. The future home of a powerful HOA, Julian Croft stood on a small, man-made hill overlooking the construction of the centerpiece, the Oasis Clubhouse. In his hand, a cup of expensive coffee. On his face, a smile of absolute triumph. He had done it. He had taken this forgotten stretch of coastal land and imposed his will upon it. He had built an empire of tranquility for the wealthy, a legacy. Below him, a yellow Komatsu excavator clawed at the red Carolina clay, digging the foundation for the community pool. Its operator, a man named Rusty with a sun-beaten face, was efficient, methodical. Scoop, lift, pivot, dump. The rhythm was hypnotic until it broke. There was a sound, a dry clack of metal on stone, not the deep groan of hitting bedrock. Something else, something sharper, hollower. Rusty paused, frowning. He adjusted his levers, lowered the bucket, and tried again. More gently this time. The clack was louder now, a protest from the ground itself. He shut off the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, filled only by the chirping of cicadas. He jumped down from the cab, grabbing a shovel. The air was still, too still. From his vantage point, Julian Croft saw the pause. He saw the supervisor striding over. His smile tightened. Delays cost money. He started down the hill, his polished leather shoes sinking slightly into the soft turf. By the time he reached the pit, Rusty had uncovered it. Just a corner, a piece of graying sandstone, peeking out from the red earth like a broken tooth. Etched into its surface were letters, faded by time and soil. Ove, daughter of Longset. A supervisor was on the phone, his voice a low, panicked whisper. Rusty just stared, his shovel hanging loosely in his hands. He had dug up forgotten things before, old bottles, a rusted plowshare, but never this. This was a grave. Julian Croft felt a cold dread snake up his spine, chilling him despite the oppressive heat. He barked an order to cover it up, to keep digging elsewhere, but it was too late. Another worker, curious, had started scraping at the dirt a few feet away. He found another one. Within minutes, the news spread through the work crew like a contagion. They were not just digging a foundation for a pool. They were digging into a cemetery. The trap had been sprung. The begins 4 years earlier. Not with a bang, but with the gentle whisper of a needle through old fabric. Dr. Elara Vance's home was a world away from the gleaming ambition of Oyster Point Preserve. It was a small, historic cottage, sheltered by the sprawling arms of live oaks draped in Spanish moss. Here, time did not march forward. It deepened. Elara was 64 then, a retired professor from Howard University, Her hands, though wrinkled, moved with the precision of a surgeon and the grace of an artist. She was repairing a story quilt, a vibrant tapestry of mismatched fabric squares made by her great-grandmother. To an outsider, it was folk art. To Elara, it was a library, a map, a testament. Her grandnephew had brought the local paper, the Beaufort Gazette, leaving it folded on her porch rail. She did not read it until the light began to fail, when the evening air grew soft, and there it was. A full-page spread. Julian Croft, smiling that smile of easy power, standing in front of an architectural rendering of Oyster Point Preserve. A new community, an exclusive lifestyle, a bright future built on, as the article said, a piece of undeveloped and forgotten land. Elara's eyes went straight to the map of the proposed layout. She saw the location for the Oasis Clubhouse. A prime spot, elevated ground, shaded by a familiar grove of ancient oaks. Her needle stopped mid-stitch. A coldness spread through her chest. A feeling she had not felt in 40 years. The feeling of guilt. It was a memory buried deep, decades ago. As a young, ambitious academic, Elara had published her definitive work on the lost community of Liberty Crossing. In that paper, faced with conflicting records and pressure from a rival academic, she had made a choice, a compromise. She had omitted the contested location of its sacred burial ground, classifying it in a footnote as likely lost to coastal erosion. It was a small act of academic cowardice to secure her reputation, a secret she had buried in technical jargon and in her own heart. She told herself it was to protect the place from treasure hunters. But she knew the truth. She had been afraid, until now. Julian Croft was not just planning to build on her ancestral land. He was planning to build on the evidence of her deepest regret. This was not just a threat. It was a chance. A terrible, our final chance to make it right. The next day, she met with Ben Carter. He was a young lawyer, sharp and idealistic. His small office filled with maps of protected wetland. He saw the case in clear terms. An injunction, a restraining order, a fight in the courts. Elara listened patiently. She let him lay out his entire strategy, his voice filled with righteous energy. When he finished, she folded her hands on her lap. Her voice was quiet, but it held the weight of generations. It held the certainty of the tide. An injunction only stops their bulldozers. Ben, she said, I need their bulldozers to show the world what they are truly destroying. Ben stared at her, his legal pads forgotten. The idea was unthinkable. But Dr. Vance, they will wipe it all away. The evidence? Everything. No, Elara replied, a flicker of cold fire in her deep-set eyes. They will unearth it, for all to see. She stood and gestured for him to follow her inside her home. The air inside smelled of old books and dried sweetgrass. She laid one of the story quilts on her large wooden table. Its colors were faded, but its patterns were intricate, a language all their own. She pointed to a square of dark blue calico, stitched with barely visible black thread in a complex spiral pattern. He thinks he is building a clubhouse, she whispered, her finger tracing the hidden design. He is preparing the evidence for his own trial. This is freedom's rest. A debt of dust. Julian Croft did not live in one of his own sterile, perfect creations. He lived in the past, or rather, he lived in its magnificent, decaying shell. The Croft ancestral home was a grand antebellum mansion, a monument of white columns and sprawling porches that was slowly losing its war with time and humidity. Paint peeled from the eaves like sunburnt skin. The air inside was thick with the scent of dust and decay. He walked the long central hall, his footsteps echoing on the heart pine floors. On the walls hung the portraits of his ancestors, stern, bearded men with eyes that judged him from across the centuries. Men who had carved an empire from this very soil. Men who had not failed. His father had been the failure. A man broken by bad investments and a changing world, who let the family name fade into a whisper of its former glory. Julian's entire life was a reaction to that shame. His ambition was not just about wealth. It was about restoration, erasure, He would build a new Croft legacy, one of steel and glass and exclusive covenants. Right on top of the old one, he would make the family name powerful again. Ilara Vance, in his mind, was just another piece of that decaying past, a stubborn weed in the garden he was trying to perfect. When his legal team brought him the initial title report, flagging the small parcel of land under her name, he barely glanced at it. An oversight. A clerical error from a bygone era. Solve it, he told his lead attorney, his tone dismissive. He gestured vaguely, as if swatting a fly. Offer her a generous sum. More than that, little shack is worth. People like that are always practical. He saw her not as a person with a history, but as a problem with a price tag. Ben Carter left his first meeting with Ilara feeling a profound sense of unease. Her plan was audacious, illogical. Even to let the beast into the garden in order to prove it was a beast. He drove home, the wheels of his sensible sedan crunching on the gravel of his own driveway. He was a man who believed in rules, in procedures, in the clean lines of the law. Ilara's strategy felt like something older, something rooted in a different kind of knowledge. That evening, he could not shake their conversation. He went up to his attic, a stuffy space filled with the forgotten artifacts of his own family's history. He opened an old, leather-bound trunk that had belonged to his great-grandfather. Inside, beneath christening gowns and yellowed letters, was a ledger. Its cover was brittle. Its pages were filled with his great-grandfather's cramped, spidery handwriting. He had been the overseer on the old Croft plantation. Ben knew this, but he had never truly confronted what it meant. He sat on the dusty floorboards and began to read. It was not a diary. It was a record of accounts, mules bought, cotton sold, and then, after the war, a different kind of transaction. Small parcels of land, dozens of them, sold by newly freed men and women. The names were Gullah, the prices were laughably low, and next to some entries were notes, terms agreed under duress, title cleared by county order. It was all there, in faded ink. The quiet, orderly process of injustice. His family had not been the masters, but they had been the managers, the facilitators, the ones who made the system work. He felt a cold sickness in the pit of his stomach. This was not just Ilara's history, it was his, too. A debt of dust. The next morning, he returned to Ilara's cottage. He looked different. The legal idealism was gone, replaced by a somber resolve. He did not talk about environmental impact statements or zoning variances. This is no longer just your case. Dr. Vance, he said, his voice steady. It is ours. While Ben was finding his purpose, Julian Croft was deploying his own. He knew that to control the land, you first had to win the people. He arranged a meeting, not at his corporate office, but at the small community church that served the local Gullah population. He arrived not in his expensive suit, but in a simple linen shirt. He brought food. He brought promises. He did not speak of buying land. He spoke of partnership, of jobs on his construction sites, of a new community center, funded entirely by his company. He spoke of scholarships for the children, a path to a future beyond the marsh. He was charming, persuasive. He offered hope, wrapped in the language of progress. And it worked. For some, Aunt Maeve, an elder whose voice carried immense weight, was torn. She was a woman of deep faith and tradition, but she was also a pragmatist. She saw the leaking roof of her church. She saw the young people leaving the community for lack of opportunity. She saw the daily struggles that history could not fix. She met Ilara by the water's edge a few days later, as the tide was going out. He offers a future. Ilara, she said, her eyes on the distant horizon. You offer a past full of pain. It is a past full of strength, too. Ilara countered gently. But you can't eat history. Ilara, Aunt Maeve said, her voice heavy with the burden of her people. You can't pay the doctor with it. Please, think of the living. Don't let your fight for the dead cost them a chance at a better life. The struggle was no longer simple. It was not just Ilara against Julian. It was a community at war with itself, a battle between memory and survival. And the first shovelfuls of dirt had not even been turned. the weaving. 4 years passed, not like the turning of pages in a book, but like the slow, deliberate work of a weaver at a loom. Each day was a thread, each season a pattern. To the burgeoning community of Oyster Point Preserve, Dr. Elara Vance was simply a fixture of the landscape, a quiet, retired woman who tended her garden and occasionally walked the old public road that bordered their perfect world. They saw her, but they did not truly see her. They did not see the woman who, after dusk, transformed. The garden gloves came off, replaced by legal pads and satellite maps. Her small cottage became a war room Ben Carter would visit, bringing stacks of documents, his youthful energy tempered now by a quiet, determined focus. They spoke in low voices, not of injunctions, but of evidence, of timelines, of strategy. Elara lived a life of profound duality. By day, she was invisible, a relic. By night, she was a general. She used her life savings, the modest pension from a lifetime of teaching, not on comforts, but on a quiet war. A team from a university in another state, a group of archaeologists specializing in non-invasive geophysics, was hired. Secretly, they never set foot on the property. They used ground-penetrating radar from public access points, their work disguised as a county survey. The data they sent back was a series of cold, digital lines. But to Elara, it was a song from the earth, a confirmation of what her great-grandmother's quilt already knew. The graves were there, undisturbed, waiting. Her own documentation was meticulous. She kept logs, bound journals filled with dates, times, and photographs taken with a long-lens camera. The arrival of lumber, the pouring of foundations, the installation of mailboxes. It was a record of construction, but more than that, it was a record of trespass, a 4-year testament to a crime in slow motion. Her patience was a thing of stone, unmoving, unyielding. Meanwhile, Oyster Point Preserve blossomed under Julian Croft's triumphant gaze. It was no longer a construction site, it was a postcard. $1 million homes stood complete. Families from up north moved in, drawn by promises of low-country charm and modern luxury. And with them came the rules. The first Homeowners Association, HOA, was formed. The HOA, a binder, thick and glossy, was delivered to each new resident. It dictated the precise shade of white for trim, the acceptable height of a hedge, the prohibition of garden gnomes. It was a covenant of conformity, designed to protect property values and preserve an image of flawless order. Julian Croft was a master of selling not just homes, but control. A promise that nothing unpleasant, nothing messy, would ever disturb their paradise. He was at the peak of his power. The properties were nearly all sold. The profits were astronomical. He had restored the Croft name, not with plantations, but with property law and shrewd marketing. Sometimes, driving out of the main gate in his sleek German sedan, he would pass Elara's little cottage. He would see her on the porch, perhaps, or walking slowly by the fence line. He saw her not as a threat, but as a final, untidy detail, a loose thread on an otherwise perfect tapestry, an annoyance that would, in time, be dealt with. He did not know that the hunter is often quietest when the prey feels most secure. He did not know he was the prey. The catalyst came in the form of a town anniversary. The mayor, a man Julian had cultivated with generous donations, wanted a centerpiece for the celebration, a symbol of Beaufort's prosperous future. Julian saw his chance, a grand opening for the Oasis Clubhouse. It would be a press event, a final declaration of his victory. But the clubhouse was behind schedule. In a meeting with his contractors, Julian's easy charm vanished. He was firm, unyielding. "Get it done," he ordered. "I don't care what it takes. I want that foundation poured by the end of the month." The pressure mounted. Crews began working longer hours. The quiet hum of construction at the edge of the property grew into a roar. Elara knew the moment had come. She felt it in the vibrations through the soles of her feet. She took out her old brass binoculars, a gift from her father. She walked to the edge of her property, to the spot where the fence met the ancient oak grove. Through the lenses, the world sharpened. She could see the bulldozers. 2 of them. Their yellow bodies like brutish insects against the green of the trees. They were clearing the last of the undergrowth, pushing relentlessly toward the elevated ground, toward the sacred quiet of freedom's rest. She lowered the binoculars. She did not need to see anymore. She closed her eyes, and the salt-laced air filled her lungs. It felt heavy, charged. The weight of 4 years of waiting, the weight of a lifetime of guilt, the weight of generations of silence. It all came down to this, to the sound of an engine, to the turning of the earth. The excavation is about to begin, and the trap that Dr. Vance has woven over 4 long years is about to close. Julian Croft believes he is building a legacy, but he does not know he is about to dig up his own judgment. What do you think will happen next? How will the truth, buried in the Carolina clay, change the lives of everyone involved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And be sure to subscribe, so you do not miss the next chapter of this unfolding story. The Court of Ghosts. The story did not just break, it shattered. First, the local Beaufort Gazette, then Charleston, then Atlanta. Within a week, the national news vans had arrived, their satellite dishes rising over the live oaks like strange, metallic fungi. They descended upon the manicured streets of Oyster Point Preserve, their cameras panning across the yellow caution tape that now cordoned off the heart of the community. The half-finished clubhouse stood silent, a monument to ambition. A crime scene. The residents of Oyster Point Preserve were trapped. They were not just homeowners, they were the unwilling inhabitants of a national scandal. Their million-dollar mortgages were now tied to a cemetery. Their dreams of serene coastal living had evaporated, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. The Homeowners Association, HOA, which Julian had envisioned as a council of quiet power, was now just a collection of angry, frightened people demanding answers that no one had. Their contracts, their life savings, it all felt worthless. Julian Croft became a ghost in his own life. He retreated into the decaying grandeur of his family home, the phone ringing incessantly. He issued statements through his lawyers. He blamed the surveyors, the contractors. He blamed historical records that were incomplete at best. But the narrative had already been set. The story was too compelling. The powerful developer desecrating the graves of a lost Gullah community. No one believed his excuses. He was not just a businessman who had made a mistake. He was a villain. The day the trial began, the old Beaufort County courthouse was packed. It was more than a legal proceeding. It was a public reckoning. Every bench was filled. Residents from Oyster Point, descendants of Liberty Crossing, reporters with their notepads, anxious county officials. They were all there to witness the final act. Alara Vance arrived with Ben Carter. She wore a simple navy blue dress, her hair pulled back neatly. She carried no briefcase, only a small, worn leather-bound portfolio. She looked less like a plaintiff in a multi-million-dollar lawsuit and more like a woman attending a somber church service. Across the aisle, Julian Croft sat with his team of 3 lawyers from a top Charleston firm. They were dressed in expensive suits, whispering confidently to each other. But Julian himself looked diminished. The easy charm was gone, replaced by a brittle tension. He refused to look at Alara. Croft's lead attorney, a man named Marcus Thorne, began his cross-examination of Alara with a practiced, almost gentle tone. He painted a picture of a shrewd, calculating woman. He detailed the timeline, the first announcement of the project, the clearing of the land, the 4 years of construction. 4 years? Dr. Vance, Thorne said, pacing slowly before the jury box. 4 years? You watched 96 homes being built. You watched families invest their life savings. You watched my client invest over $100 million. And you said nothing. He paused, letting the silence hang in the air. Why did you wait? Dr. Vance, why not stop this from the beginning? If you truly cared so much about those graves, was it perhaps because the financial damages would be greater after the homes were built? The accusation was ugly. Plain, he was painting her as an extortionist. Alara sat perfectly still in the witness box, her hands folded in her lap. My reasons, she said, her voice clear and steady, were my own. This was the moment Ben Carter had prepared for. He had spent a sleepless night after Croft's legal team had filed a last-minute motion to introduce Ilara's 40-year-old academic paper as evidence. They had found her secret. They planned to use it as a weapon, to portray her as a fraud. Ben had decided they would not give them the chance. They would light the match themselves. On redirect, Ben approached his own client. His voice was soft, respectful. Dr. Vance, Mr. Thorne has questioned your motives. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about your academic work. Specifically, your 1,982 paper on the Liberty Crossing settlement. A murmur went through the courtroom. Ilara's eyes met Ben's. A silent understanding passed between them. This was it. The scholar's gambit, Ben continued. In that paper, in a footnote on page 112, you refer to the location of the Freedom's Rest burial ground as unverifiable and likely lost to coastal erosion. Can you tell the court why you wrote that? When you knew its true location, the air in the room became charged. This was not an attack from the opposition. This was coming from her own lawyer. Julian Croft leaned forward, a flicker of triumphant cruelty in his eyes. He thought he was witnessing a self-destruction. Ilara Vance took a deep breath. She did not look at the judge or the jury. She looked out, over the heads of the crowd, as if seeing something far away. I was young, she began, her voice trembling slightly before finding its strength. I was ambitious. I had built my entire career on the story of Liberty Crossing. Another historian, a professor from a more prestigious university, challenged my findings on the burial ground. He had influence. I was afraid. She paused, and the silence in the courtroom was absolute. I was afraid of losing my credibility, of having my work dismissed, so I compromised. I buried the truth in a footnote. I told myself it was to protect the graves from being disturbed, but that was a lie I told myself. The truth is, I was protecting my career. I was protecting myself. Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not let them fall. She finally turned her gaze to the jury, her expression one of profound, painful honesty. That silence, that compromise, has been the greatest regret of my life. For 40 years, I have lived with the knowledge that I failed my ancestors. I failed the very history I swore to protect. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet it carried to every corner of the room. So when Mr. Croft's attorney asks me why I waited 4 years, I will tell you. It was not for money. It was for this. For this one chance, in this public place, to correct my own history. I was silent once out of fear, for my own gain. I could not be silent a second time, when the very souls of my people were being disturbed. This lawsuit was never just about land. It was about my penance. The courtroom was still, utterly still. The narrative had been shattered. Julian Croft's confident smirk had vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. His lawyer's clever trap had been dismantled by a truth that was more powerful than any legal strategy. Ilara Vance was no longer just a plaintiff. She was a woman who had just reclaimed her soul. A bridge of oysters. The judge's voice was even devoid of emotion, but her words landed like hammer blows, dismantling Julian Croft's world piece by piece. She spoke of incontrovertible evidence, of a chain of title as clear as the coastal light. She spoke of gross negligence, of a reckless disregard for history, for decency, for the law itself. The court found in favor of the plaintiff, Dr. Ilara Vance. Her ownership of the 40-acre parcel was affirmed. Croft Legacy Developments was found liable for all damages. The ruling was not just a legal victory, it was a moral judgment. Julian Croft sat perfectly still as his empire crumbled. He did not flinch. He did not protest. He simply stared ahead, his handsome face a mask of disbelief. He lost everything in that moment. The company, the investors, the pending lawsuits from every single homeowner would guarantee his financial ruin. Later, there would be bankruptcy hearings, fraud investigations, but the real loss happened right there. Under the stern gaze of the court, he lost his legacy. His final scene was not in a courtroom. but on the decaying veranda of his ancestral home, a foreclosure notice was taped to the heavy oak door. He carried a single suitcase. He did not look back at the portraits in the hall. He simply got into a modest car and drove away, disappearing from the land his family had once ruled. This time for good. Elara now held the fate of 96 families in her hands. The power was absolute. She could have evicted them. She could have sold the land to the highest bidder. She could have imposed punitive fees. But her war had never been with them. A week after the verdict, she called a meeting, not in an office, but on the great lawn in the center of the development. The manicured grass now slightly overgrown. The homeowners came, their faces a mixture of fear, resentment, and a sliver of hope. They saw her not as a conquering general, but as the quiet woman from the cottage, the woman who had brought down a giant. She stood before them, without a microphone. Her voice carried on the gentle sea breeze. "My fight was never with you," she began. Her words simple, direct. "You were sold a dream on land that was not theirs to sell. You are victims of the same arrogance that desecrated my ancestors' resting place. I do not want to take your homes. I want to help you make this place a true community. One built on truth, not on lies." She laid out her proposal. It was not a demand. It was an invitation. The families could stay. Their property titles would be rectified and secured. But things had to change. The Oasis Clubhouse, a monument to greed, would be torn down. In its place, they would build a Gullah cultural and historical center, with a memorial park surrounding the restored burial ground. The name Oyster Point Preserve would be retired, and the Homeowners Association, HOA, it would be reborn. The old bylaws, designed for exclusion and control, were to be shredded. A new HOA would be formed. Its charter drafted by a committee of both new residents and Gullah descendants. Aunt Maeve, who stood beside Elara, had already agreed to be its first co-chair. This HOA would not be about enforcing rules. It would be about weaving a community together. The final scene unfolds 5 years later. The Gullah Cultural Center is a beautiful, low-slung building. Its walls made of tabby, the traditional concrete of oyster shells, sand, and lime, glistening in the sun. It is a place of life. School children tour its exhibits. Tourists listen to storytellers. The aroma of Aunt Maeve's cooking drifts from its community kitchen. The memorial park is a quiet, sacred space. The old gravestones have been carefully restored, standing now amongst sweetgrass and live oaks. The community itself is thriving. Its name is Liberty Crossing at Oyster Point. Elara Vance, now well into her 70s, sits on a bench in the park. She is grayer, frailer, but her eyes are serene. She is teaching a small, multiracial group of children how to make a story quilt. Ben Carter, now a respected heritage rights attorney, walks over and sits beside her. He has a few gray hairs of his own now. They sit in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sunlight dapple through the moss. "You did it, Elara," Ben says quietly. "You really did it." Elara looks at the children, their small hands guiding needles through bright patches of cloth. She looks at the center, a bridge made of shells and stories. She looks at the homes where families now lived, not just as property owners, but as stewards of a shared history. The omniscient narrator's voice returned, calm and resonant. "On this stretch of Beaufort land, where the past and present are forever entwined, a trap was set not to destroy, but to rebuild. It taught Julian Croft the price of arrogance, taught Ben Carter the meaning of redemption, and it taught Elara Vance the grace of forgiveness, not just for her enemies, but for herself. And it left a legacy, not written on a deed, but woven from the threads of truth, memory, and reconciliation. A legacy that could never be bulldozed." The weight of victory. The verdict was in. The headlines had faded, and now there was only the quiet. Weeks after the courtroom gavel fell, Elara Vance stood on the hill where Julian Croft once watched his empire rise. The silence was profound, not peaceful, but heavy. The machines were gone. The workers were gone. The only sounds were the rustle of wind through the pines and the distant cry of a gull. Victory did not taste sweet. It tasted of dust and solitude. It felt like a burden. Below her lay a ghost town of beautiful, empty houses. She had won the deeds. She had won the land, but in doing so, she had inherited 96 lives. Suspended in a state of legal limbo, Ben Carter found her there. He carried a thick leather briefcase, and it seemed to weigh him down. The youthful fire in his eyes had been replaced by a weary pragmatism. He opened the case and showed her the files, mounds of them, each one representing a home, a family, a mortgage. We won the war. Dr. Vance, he said, his voice quiet against the wind. Now we have to figure out how to govern the kingdom. He explained the reality, the nightmare of untangling the titles with the banks, the process of renegotiating with homeowners, the legal black hole of a defunct developer. Each step was a mountain of paperwork, a bureaucratic labyrinth. The community Julian Croft had built was unraveling. Fear was a contagion. Some families, the ones who could afford the loss, sold their homes for pennies on the dollar to faceless investment firms. Just to escape, they packed their moving vans in the dead of night, leaving behind perfect lawns and empty rooms. Others, who had poured their life savings into their slice of paradise, were trapped, and their fear was curdling into anger. That anger needed a target, and the target was Alara. She agreed to attend a meeting, a gathering of the now powerless Homeowners Association, HOA. The HOA. It was held in the half-finished shell of the clubhouse. The sight of the unearthing, the irony was lost on no one. The air was thick with resentment. They blamed Julian Croft. They blamed the county. But they saved a special kind of fury for her. The woman who had been right, a man in a crisp polo shirt, his face flushed with rage, stood up. He pointed a trembling finger at her. You might have the paperwork, he spat. But we poured our sweat and our savings into these walls. You destroyed our dream. Alara did not flinch. She just listened. Her face was a calm mask. But inside, every word landed like a stone. She had fought for the dead. Now, she was facing the living, and their wounds were fresh. The pressure did not just come from the new residents. It came from within her own community. Aunt May visited her, her brow furrowed with worry. She brought a basket of sweetgrass and sage, as if to cleanse the air of conflict. You woke the ghosts. Alara, she said softly, her hands busy braiding the grass. Now you have to find a way to give them rest. And the living, too. The descendants of Liberty Crossing, once united behind her cause, were now splintered. News of the victory and the potential value of the land had brought cousins and distant relatives out of the woodwork. Some wanted to sell, cash out, take the money and run from the painful history. Others wanted to turn the entire development into a private preserve, a memorial sealed off from the world, unifying a vision for the future. Alara realized was proving to be just as difficult as reclaiming the past. One night, the weight became unbearable. Alara sat alone in her small archive room, the scent of old paper and dried herbs thick around her. The files Ben had given her were stacked on the floor. The angry faces from the HOA meeting swam in her mind. The pleading voices of her own people echoed in her ears. The burden of making the right choice for so many felt crushing. Impossible. She felt the slow, creeping tendrils of despair. Her eyes fell upon the story quilt, the one that had started it all. It was draped over a chair, its colors muted in the dim light. She reached out, her fingers tracing the familiar lines of thread, the spiral stitched in black, the hidden patterns. The narrator's voice deepens with introspection. She was not just touching fabric. She was touching a legacy of survival. She thought of her great-grandmother, weaving these stories by candlelight after a day of back-breaking labor, encoding a map to freedom, a record of their soul, into simple cloth. These were not tales of easy victory. They were stories of enduring the impossible, of holding on when everything was designed to tear you apart. The strength she needed was not in the court's ruling. It was not in the deeds that now bore her name. It was here, in the threads, a quiet resilience stitched into the very fabric of her being. She would not let this victory become another ruin. She would not let her ancestors' struggle end in bitterness and division. She took a deep breath. The despair receded. The path forward was not clear, but she knew she had to walk it. The first stitch. Instead of a summons, she sent an invitation. It arrived not in a sterile, legal envelope, but in a simple, cream-colored card. The font was elegant. The message, unheard of. Dr. Elara Vance requests the pleasure of your company at a community low-country boil. It specified a date, a time, and a location, the main common green of the development formerly known as Oyster Point Preserve. It was an invitation extended to everyone. The homeowners, the Liberty Crossing descendants, the mayor. The day of the event. The air was thick with more than just humidity. It was thick with mistrust. People arrived cautiously, as if approaching a treaty negotiation. They stood in small, self-segregated groups. The homeowners, mostly white and clad in casual resort wear, clustered near the perfectly landscaped entrance. The Gula descendants, a vibrant mix of ages, gathered under the shade of a large oak tree. Their conversations a low, melodic murmur. City officials hovered awkwardly in the middle, looking uncomfortable in their starched shirts. Long folding tables were laden with newspapers, soon to be covered with steaming piles of shrimp, corn, sausage, and potatoes. The smell was incredible, comforting. The smell of home, but it did little to ease the tension. Dr. Vance did not make a grand entrance. She was already there, moving quietly among the tables, checking on the cooking pots. She wore a simple linen dress, her hair tied back. She held no clipboard, no microphone. She began to walk, not to a podium, but from table to table. She did not talk about deeds, or lawsuits, or money. She spoke in a low, gentle voice. She asked a woman about the hydrangeas in her yard. She complimented a man on his fishing boat. She listened to a Gullah elder tell a story about his grandfather. She was not a victor claiming her spoils. She was just a neighbor. We follow the Briggs couple, Mark and Sarah. They had come to the boil with a simmering anger, ready to confront this woman who held their financial future in her hands. They had rehearsed their arguments. They saw her approaching their small group. Mark straightened up, bracing himself. But Elara did not address their unspoken grievances. She smiled at their young daughter, who was hiding behind Sarah's legs. She has her father's eyes, Elara said softly. Then she looked at Mark. I hear you're a woodworker. That must be a rewarding craft. Mark was taken aback. How did you know that? This is a small town, Elara replied with a hint of a smile. Word gets around. They spoke for a few more minutes, about his workshop, about their daughter's upcoming school year. By the time Elara moved on to the next group, the anger in Mark's shoulders had unclenched. It was replaced by a disorienting confusion. It is very hard to hate someone who remembers the color of your daughter's eyes. When everyone had eaten, when the initial tension had softened into a wary truce fueled by good food, Elara finally stood on the small wooden porch of the community's sales office. All eyes turned to her. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The speech, the demands, but she did not make demands. She simply thanked them for coming. I don't have all the answers, she said, her voice carrying easily in the quiet evening air. This land has a complicated past, and now it has a complicated present. I cannot undo what has been done, but I believe we can decide, together, what we do next. She paused. The law says this land is mine, but my heart says this land must be a home, for all of us. Then came her proposal. It was not a legal motion. It was an idea. I propose we form a new Interim Homeowners Association, HOA, she said. A council, a temporary one. To start, it will be made of representatives from the residents who live here now and representatives from the families of Liberty Crossing. Together, this new council will chart the course for our future. They will decide the rules. They will decide the name of this place. They will decide how we live together. The silence that followed was not angry. It was thoughtful. She was not imposing a solution. She was offering a process. She was offering them a voice. The process of forming that new HOA was not easy. The first few meetings, held in that same sales office, were fraught with tension. They argued about everything: permissible paint color, fence height regulations, management fees. But these small arguments were really about bigger things. They were about control, about fairness, about learning to trust. Ben Carter was there for every meeting, not as Alara's lawyer, but as a neutral mediator. He used his legal skills to draft bylaws that were equitable, ensuring the Gullah representatives had just as much power as the homeowners, creating a system of checks and balances. Slowly, painstakingly, they began to find common ground. The council decided that their first official act would not be to pass a rule. It would be a project, a symbol. Together, they would build a community garden. They chose the exact spot, the scarred piece of earth where the clubhouse pool was supposed to be. The place where the first grave was found. The Gullah families brought heirloom seeds passed down through generations: okra, collard greens, sweet potatoes. The new residents brought their modern horticultural knowledge: drip irrigation systems, soil testing kits. They worked side by side, their hands in the same dirt. They turned the soil over the ghosts of the past, not to bury them again, but to cultivate something new. It was the first stitch, the slow, careful work of mending a community that had been torn apart. From the fragments of deception, the first seeds of a new community are being sown. But the road ahead is long and uncertain. Can a single garden be enough to heal the scars of history? Can a homeowners association, HOA built on the fragile foundation of reconciliation, truly last? If you are still listening, please help me by leaving a personal thought in the comments below, so I know that I still have companions on this journey. Your presence is the greatest encouragement for me to continue telling this final chapter, to see if the stitches Dr. Vance has started can truly create a quilt large enough to cover everyone. Thank you. The gathering of hands. Months bled into a year. The interim council, born from that first low-country boil, had found its rhythm. Trust, once a foreign concept, was slowly being built. Meeting by contentious meeting, they had tackled the mundane but essential tasks of governance: trash collection schedules, streetlight repairs, architectural guidelines. But now, the time had come to fulfill the promise that was the heart of their new covenant. It was time to build the Gullah Cultural and Historical Center. The money was there, a substantial fund, managed by the court from the liquidated assets of Croft Legacy Developments, was supplemented by preservation grants Ben Carter had tirelessly secured. But Alara was adamant about one thing: this would not be a structure of ordinary brick and mortar. Its foundations would not be poured from modern concrete. She insisted on tabby, the traditional building material of the Low Country, a rugged, beautiful concrete made from equal parts oyster shells, lime, sand, and water. It was a choice steeped in symbolism. Tabby was made from the remnants of millions of tiny lives, their shells burned, crushed, and bound together over time to create something strong, enduring. It was the perfect metaphor for the community they were trying to build, a new strength forged from the fragments of the past. The construction of the center became a community project unlike any other. It was more than a building site. It was a classroom, a festival, a healing ground. On weekends, Gullah descendants, their family names reaching back centuries, would come to teach the old ways. They showed the new residents how to burn the oyster shells in a kiln until they turned to lime, how to mix the aggregate in the right proportions. They shared stories as they worked, their voices rising and falling with the cadence of the sea. Songs that had been passed down through generations echoed across the grounds where bulldozers once roared. The new residents brought their own skills. An architect who had bought a home in Oyster Point Preserve volunteered to draw up the plans, working closely with Alara to create a building that was both modern in function and timeless in spirit. A civil engineer oversaw the foundation work. A landscape designer planned the memorial park that would surround the restored burial ground. They were no longer just homeowners. They were barn raisers, contributing to something far larger than their own property lines. Inside the center, even before the walls were finished, the true work began. Alara's story quilts were to be the centerpiece of the main exhibit, each one preserved in a climate-controlled case. But next to that display, a new project was taking shape. A massive, empty quilting frame was erected. This was to be the community quilt. Each family in Liberty Crossing at Oyster Point, old and new, was invited to create a single square, a square that told their story, how they came to this land, what it meant to them. Aunt Maeve found her calling not in the contentious debates of the HOA meetings, but in the heart of the future center, the community kitchen. She became its curator of flavor and memory, planning a program to teach the history of Gullah soul food. One afternoon, as she and Alara watched a group of children, some black, some white, learning to properly season a pot of shrimp and grits, she placed a hand on Alara's arm. "You were right, Alara," she said, her voice soft. "History can't be eaten. It's true, but it sure does nourish the soul, and it's giving our children a future I never thought I'd see." Even some of the loudest voices of opposition from the early days had softened. A man who had once angrily accused Alara of destroying his retirement investment now spent his Saturdays helping to lay the Tabby foundations. He confessed to Ben Carter one day, wiping sweat from his brow, that for the first time since moving here, he finally felt like he was home. They were not just building a structure, they were remaking the very definition of what a home and a community could be. The weaving. 5 years later, the Carolina sun, softer in the late afternoon, filtered through the leaves of the live oaks. The air in Beaufort no longer felt heavy with unspoken history. It felt alive with it. The Gullah Cultural Center now stood where the Oasis Clubhouse was meant to be. It was not a monument to victory, but a testament to conversation. Built with tabby foundations and reclaimed wood, it felt as if it had always been there. It had become a destination, a place where tourists and locals alike came not just to see exhibits, but to listen. The memorial park surrounding the restored cemetery was quiet, meticulously kept, a place for peaceful contemplation. The community, officially renamed Liberty Crossing at Oyster Point, was thriving. The property values had not just recovered, they had soared. But the reasons were different now. People were drawn here not for exclusivity, but for authenticity. They wanted to live in a place that had a soul, a place that had a story. The Homeowners Association HOA, once a symbol of rigid control, now operated with a sense of shared purpose. The HOA, its meetings, held in the main hall of the Cultural Center, were models of respectful collaboration. They still discussed lawn care and trash collection, but they also planned community heritage days and educational workshops. It had become a model for how a community could govern itself, not through rules, but through relationships. The people had changed. 2. Ben Carter was now a leading heritage rights lawyer, his name known throughout the country. He used the precedents from Alara's case to help other marginalized communities reclaim their histories from the brink of erasure. Julian Croft served a short prison sentence for fraud. He was released into anonymity, moving to a city in the Midwest where no one knew his name. Sometimes, late at night in a public library, he would read articles online about the success of Liberty Crossing. His face, reflected in the cold glow of the screen, showed nothing. No anger, no remorse, just emptiness. The legacy he had been so obsessed with building belonged to someone else now. And Alara Vance, now in her mid-70s, had found a measure of peace she never thought possible. She had passed the leadership of the new community boards to a younger generation, a mix of Gullah descendants and new residents. She spent most of her days at the center, her official title being Historian in Residence, but really, she was a storyteller. Alara sat on her familiar bench in the memorial park. Beside her sat a young girl with bright, curious eyes. It was Lily, the daughter of the Briggs family. She had grown up here, in this remade world. She pointed through the large glass windows of the center, towards the main hall. Hanging there, covering an entire wall, was the finished community quilt, a vast, breathtaking tapestry of color and texture. "Where's our family square, Dr. Vance?" Lily asked, her small voice full of genuine curiosity. Alara smiled, a gentle, easy smile that reached her eyes. She raised a frail but steady hand and pointed. It's right there. Sweet girl. Her finger indicated a square stitched with shimmering silver thread, depicting a small house with a swing set. It was nestled right next to a square made of vibrant kente cloth, its bold patterns telling a much older story. Right next to my family's square. Do you see all the stories? They're woven together. On this stretch of Beaufort land, where the past and present are forever intertwined, a trap was set, not for destruction, but for reclamation. It taught Julian Croft the price of arrogance, taught Ben Carter the meaning of atonement, and taught Alara Vance the grace of forgiveness not just for her enemies, but for herself. And it left behind a legacy, not one written on deeds or property lines, but one woven from the threads of truth, memory, and reconciliation. A legacy that could never be bulldozed, a legacy that could never be paved over, a legacy that could never, ever be erased. So, what does it truly mean to walk into a trap you never saw coming? For the HOA and the developer of Oyster Point, the trap wasn't made of steel or cunning legal loopholes. It was made of something far stronger: history. It was woven from the threads of a story quilt and fortified by one woman's unbreakable patience. Think of that moment when the bulldozer's metal blade struck the first gravestone. That was the sound of the trap springing shut. A trap set not by malice, but by the quiet determination of Dr. Alara Vance to make them unearth the truth with their own hands. Her story is a powerful reminder that the ground beneath our feet has a memory, and true justice sometimes requires waiting for the arrogant to dig their own graves. What did that moment of discovery feel like for you? I would be honored to read your thoughts in the comments. If you appreciate stories where patience and history become the ultimate arbiters of justice, perhaps consider subscribing to Deepu Kader Stories. Thank you for being here and for sharing this journey with me.